At the start of World War II, aviation was still in its infancy. We didn't really have a good idea of what high-altitude flight would do to aircrews. At the start of the war, only 3 hyperbaric chambers used to simulate the low oxygen and low pressure experienced at high altitudes even existed in the United States. 3! This was really bad because early aircraft were neither pressurized nor heated, but aircrews had to fly as high as possible to avoid ground fire and enemy fighters. And long-range bombing missions could last for 8 to 10 hours. Crews suffered hypoxia from the lack of oxygen and decompression sickness from low pressure. They suffered from the cold, but they also suffered from the psychological pressures of combat. We'll come back to that. Truth is, at first, the only real concern was the physical, and so the Army Air Corps had to figure out ways to safely provide pressurized oxygen to aircrews, ways to develop better-fitting oxygen masks to avoid fogging and freezing of goggles, and ways to keep people warm, or at least keep them from freezing. Early bomber crewmen wore thick, sheep shearling clothing to fend off the crippling cold. In 1943, a typical combat dress for a B-17 gunner consisted of heavy woolen underwear, 2 pairs of lined wool socks, a modified F-1 electric suit, and RAF-designed electric gloves and socks, standard A6 boots, and A4 coveralls with a B5 helmet. Additionally, some men wore leather A2 jackets over their overalls. If an electric suit was not worn, standard protective garb was the heavy fleece-lined B6 jacket and A5 trousers in its place. The F1 suit was nicknamed the Blue Bunny for its very distinctive color. It's like a Snuggie and a heating pad mixed together. They were to be plugged into a heater control box located at each crew station. But the single-circuit F1 was notoriously unreliable. The suits didn't always heat evenly, with feet too cold and hands too hot, for instance. The internal wires often broke while in use, shocking, even sometimes burning the wearer, and then leaving them without heat. Yikes. Bomber crew clothing got better throughout the war. Lightweight, alpaca-lined clothing helped, and eventually someone figured out a more efficient electric suit, wired in parallel to prevent the entire suit from failing if a wire was bent or fractured. This one modification improved the suit's reliability over 75%. When aloft, you have to remember to add an oxygen mask, a flying helmet, goggles, and a flak jacket when needed. Oh, and a steel GI helmet fitted on top of the flying helmet. In totality, this was around 75 pounds or so, and some of the crew would be standing for long periods of time. However, without reliable or adequate protection, cold was a major issue. Waist gunners, for example, stood in front of an open window for hours on end. Mild cases of frostbite would ground a man for 4 to 14 days. However, about a third of all cases were serious and would require hospitalization. Aircrews were actually more likely to be grounded from frostbite than any other injury. Oxygen was also a major problem. In the 8th Air Force, there were 303 cases of anoxia, and 47 of those were fatal. The further you got from the cockpit, the more dangerous it was to lose oxygen. The highest case rate was for ball turret gunners, but waist and tail gunners also had high numbers. This was because there was no one around to see if their oxygen was disconnected and they were in distress. A breakdown, common to combat flyers, is called operational fatigue. In other words, a nervous breakdown. Often it was called gutting out by the crews. Interestingly, bomber crews had a higher rate of operational fatigue than fighter pilots. This has been attributed to the particular stresses of having to stay at post in a formation position for long periods of time, while they had to contend with the loud noise, the vibration, the glare, cramped and bitterly cold quarters, heavy fight clothing, and limited oxygen. It wasn't totally uncommon for aircrew to become flak happy, which today we would refer to as post-traumatic stress disorder. All in all, high-altitude flight was challenging both mentally and physically, and the air crews who survived this could tell you more. Please check out some of our oral histories for stories of flights with the 390th Heavy Bombardment Group over Europe during World War II.